Hi, my name is Sean Kirkby, and I'll be demonstrating how to retrieve a client token using JavaScript. For this tutorial, I'll be using the Plunker environment. If you're not familiar with Plunker, I recommend you check it out. It's pretty cool. First thing I'm going to do is create a new jQuery project. We will be using jQuery for this example. Next, I'm going to take the script references that Plunker created for us and move them to below our body tag. It's a little practice I like just to keep the web page responsive. I'll remove the default paragraphs and we'll set a title for the page. We'll kick off the request for our token using a button. I'm going to give it an ID so it's easy to work with in jQuery. And then we'll create a div that we can use to display the results of our request. I'll also give it an ID. And some default text. Okay, and then lastly, in our HTML file, we'll create some JavaScript that connects up our onClick event handler for the button. We're going to do this through jQuery again. We'll reference the button by its ID. Then call the on method, specify the click event handler, and tell it to run a method called getToken, which we haven't created yet. All right, so that's it for our HTML. Now we'll pop over to JavaScript. We'll delete the default JavaScript. And I'm going to create a variable to keep our token when it is returned to us, and also a variable to keep the base URI. The base URI is a cluster-specific URI that we should use to make actual API calls. So the first function we want to create is our getToken function. And in this function, we're going to do two things. We'll first update our div to indicate that we're getting a token. And then next we'll just do a simple AJAX call through jQuery. The AJAX method takes an object that describes the HTTP request we want to send. The first property we'll set is the type property, which specifies the HTTP method, which needs to be post. Then we'll specify the URL. This should point to the production API server. Then the inContact authorization service. And the token service. Next, we need to specify the type of data that we're going to be passing in. So we'll be sending a data object and in the message body, and we need to specify the content type as JSON. If we don't do this, then the API framework will complain that the media type is incorrect because it only supports JSON on input. Next, we also want to specify what type or how we want the return data to be formatted. JSON's the only option we have, but we need to include this. That's the jQuery syntax for specifying JSON. This roughly corresponds to the accept header. Then we need to specify the actual data. And for this, it's a string that goes in the request body. It needs to be a JSON representation of an object. So we're going to use the stringify method, and we're going to pass into that an object, and that object will have all the fields that we need to send in order to request a token. In the case of a client credentials token, there's only two fields that we need to include. There's the grant type field, which for client credentials request needs to be set to client credentials, and then there's the scope field, which we're going to limit to chat. So this specifies that when we get the token, we can only use it to make API calls in the chat API. Then the next thing we need to do is send in a header. So we're going to create the headers property and then specify an object that will have one property in it called an authorization. So this will cause the request to include an authorization header. And the value of it needs to be basic, followed by a space, and then a base64 encoded string that includes the application name, the vendor name, and the application secret. Those three values can be retrieved from Central in the API applications section. So in order to base64 encode our string, I'm going to use a method called B to A, which is a common method to base64 encode data in several popular browsers. If your browser doesn't, the one that you intend, if any of the browsers you intend to support don't support this method call, then you'll need to find some other way to base64 encode the data. Now I don't want to type the full string in, so I'm just going to copy it to the clipboard. I already have it ready to go here. And if you look at it, this is the application name, followed by the @ sign, then the vendor name, followed by a colon, and then the application secret. Again, these three values are available from the Central website in the API application registration when you register your app. Lastly, we need to specify what method to run when the AJAX request succeeds, and then what method to run if the AJAX request fails. Okay, so that's our getToken method. Next, we need to create our event handlers. The success method is going to receive the body of the response. So we'll specify that as a parameter called data. And then in that response will be included the API token. The property name is actually access token. You can get details about all the property names in the OAuth documentation. And then we also want to save the base URI. And then the property name for this that we want is resource server base URI. And lastly, we want to update our div to indicate that we successfully retrieved the token. Okay. And then lastly, we want to create our event handler in case of an error. This is going to receive three parameters: XHR, status, which is the HTTP status result code, and then error, which is the description of the error. And all we need to do here is update our div HTML with the error information. Okay, so we're putting the status and the error in there. And that should be it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this plunk, and then we'll run it. So it's going to render our HTML page and give us the button. We'll click the button, and you can see it says token retrieved, base URI. It tells us what our base URI is. And so this is how you can retrieve an API token for the inContact API using JavaScript.